In 1993, Carol Williams, a nurse beloved by her coworkers and patients, vanished from New York without a trace, leaving behind only a chilling mystery that would remain unsolved for over 20 years. Her disappearance would haunt a community that relied on her every day. Who could have imagined something like this could happen to someone so dependable? Why would a reliable woman, known for her punctuality, her calm demeanor, and her unwavering dedication, simply vanish? Who could want to harm her? Was this simply a case of bad luck? Or was there something more sinister behind it all? The question on everyone's mind: what happened to Carol Williams, and who was behind it? Carol Williams was a 30-year-old nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, a hospital known for its excellence, and Carol was the heart of its cardiac unit. She had been with the hospital for years, and in that time, she had earned the admiration and trust of everyone she worked with. Known for her punctuality, Carol always arrived at work early, 15 minutes to be exact, as she always liked to prepare for her shift with a moment of calm before the chaos of the day began. Her colleagues would joke that she was more reliable than the subway schedule itself, always on time, always ready, always willing to go above and beyond for her patients. Her soft-spoken, yet confident demeanor made her the rock that her department leaned on. She was someone everyone could rely on, someone they knew would never falter. Carol wasn't just a nurse. She was a sister, a daughter, and a friend. She had a quiet strength about her, one that gave comfort to her patients and her coworkers alike. And in this bustling city where people come and go, Carol's consistency, her steadiness, was a rare gift. It was the morning of October 15th, 1993, just like any other. Carol's day started with the familiar sound of her alarm ringing at exactly 5:45 a.m. She reached for the clock without opening her eyes, her fingers finding the button with the muscle memory of 1,000 mornings. The soft click of the clock stopping was the first sound that broke the silence of her small apartment. The radiator kicked in, knocking its metallic rhythm against the wall, a sound she had long grown used to. And outside, the early city buses began their loud journey down Northern Boulevard, carrying the first wave of Queens residents toward their busy day. Sarah Chen, Carol's roommate, worked the night shift as a medical technician at Elmhurst Hospital. She had grown accustomed to Carol's morning routine, how they'd pass each other in the narrow hallway of their apartment on 41st Avenue. Carol's footsteps were familiar to Sarah, always light and steady, the same rhythm that Sarah followed on her own way to bed, each of them living their separate lives, yet intertwined by the shared routines of their small apartment. Sarah would hear the bathroom door creak open as Carol began getting ready for her day, the familiar sound of Carol in the kitchen, preparing her morning coffee, the rich, strong aroma filling the air, wafting through their apartment, slowly waking Sarah up as she lay in bed. The hum of Carol's small percolator was a sound Sarah had come to associate with the quiet start of every morning. 2 pieces of toast, lightly buttered, a cup of coffee. It was a simple routine, but it was Carol's. At 6:15 a.m., Carol had already slipped into her navy blue scrubs, perfectly pressed, just the way she always did it. By 6:30 a.m., Carol had her coat on, her purse slung over her shoulder. It was that familiar burgundy leather purse that had become a staple in her daily life. She grabbed her keys from the kitchen counter, checked the time, and nodded to Sarah as she walked out the door. It was a regular morning. Carol left the apartment as she always did. She was on her way to the Roosevelt Avenue subway station to catch the 6:45 a.m. train to work at Mount Sinai. But that day something went wrong. She never showed up for work. Carol, the woman who had never missed a shift, who had never once been late, had disappeared from the most routine part of her day. And no one could explain why. Her purse was left behind. Her belongings were untouched. There was no sign of her at her apartment, no clue as to where she had gone. Where was Carol? Was she still alive? Had something happened to her along the way? Why didn't anyone see anything? Where was the woman who had for years been the reliable heartbeat of her community? The search began, and the answers were nowhere to be found. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I'd love to know just how far this story is reaching. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the hours began to stretch, and Jennifer Williams felt a knot form in her stomach. She had been calling Carol's apartment for hours, each time her calls unanswered. It wasn't like her sister to miss work without notice, especially with everything Carol had going on. Her responsibilities at the hospital, the patients who relied on her, the routines were ingrained in Carol's life, and Jennifer knew them as well as she knew her own. Jennifer's unease turned to a tight, burning panic that gnawed at her gut. She dialed Carol's number again and again. Each time the phone rang unanswered, it felt as if the world was slowly tilting off its axis. She didn't want to believe it, but the worry was creeping in. Something wasn't right. Jennifer tried to keep calm, tried to convince herself that maybe Carol had just gotten caught up in something. Maybe she was just running late. Maybe a delayed subway or a minor inconvenience. But deep down, Jennifer knew Carol would have called. She always did. The clock seemed to tick louder now. Jennifer stood in the middle of her apartment, holding the phone to her ear as she waited for an answer that never came. It was 9:30 a.m. when the first frantic call to Mount Sinai Hospital went out. "Where's my sister?" Jennifer's voice cracked as she spoke to a receptionist. The urgency, the raw panic in her tone was unmistakable. But the hospital's response was just as unhelpful. The receptionist told her that Carol was probably delayed, and to give it some time. Jennifer's heart dropped. She didn't have time. She knew this wasn't a simple delay. She called again, and then again. Each time the story was the same. No one had seen Carol, and no one knew why she wasn't there. By the time Jennifer dialed Carol's phone a fourth time, her thoughts had already started spiraling. It was no longer about missing a shift. It was about something much darker. She thought of all the things that could go wrong in a city like New York. Anything could happen. People could vanish without a trace, and Carol's sudden disappearance made it feel all too real. Jennifer began to fear the worst. As Jennifer's anxiety reached new heights, the police were called. They were quick to arrive with detectives combing through Carol's apartment and asking Jennifer to retrace every step Carol had taken that morning. The detectives took notes, but their faces were stoic, almost detached. They listened as Jennifer explained Carol's routine, detailing every small piece of information, every moment she could remember, from Carol's morning coffee to the way she had adjusted the strap of her purse before leaving for work. "We'll need to follow her steps," one detective said, his voice low, matter of fact. "Start with her usual route. See if anyone saw her." The first place they went was the Roosevelt Avenue subway station. The detectives scanned the platform for any clues, asking commuters if they had seen a woman in navy blue scrubs heading to work. But it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Thousands of people move through that station every day, all of them with their own lives, their own worries. No one could remember anything specific. The police scoured the area around Roosevelt Avenue, asking for security footage from nearby shops, restaurants, and banks. But the cameras in the area were either too low quality or pointed in directions that didn't capture the relevant details. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. Days passed, and Jennifer's sense of dread only grew. The search continued without any real breakthroughs. As hours turned into days, the investigation felt like it was stumbling through a fog of unanswered questions. Detective Mike Sullivan took the lead on the case, his face shadowed with the grim realization that these situations rarely ended well. As an experienced investigator, he knew that most missing persons cases were quickly solved. But this wasn't just any case. Carol wasn't the type of person to just disappear. She had too many connections, too many routines. It didn't make sense. There were no signs of foul play, no threats, no odd behavior from Carol's friends or family. Everything seemed normal. Yet here she was, gone without a trace. Sullivan had seen cases like this before, where people simply vanished. But this one, This one felt different. The search started to feel futile. No one had seen Carol that morning, and no one had any idea where she could be. Every lead that was followed seemed to evaporate into nothingness. The frustration began to mount, not only for the police, but for Jennifer too. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity. Days passed and still no answers. No new evidence. No new leads. The police tried everything they could, but the case was slipping through their fingers. What had happened to Carol Williams? Why had she disappeared so completely? Had she been taken? Did someone want to harm her? Or was there something else, something darker, lurking beneath the surface? The questions only grew, and the longer Carol stayed missing, the more unsettling the case became. The tension in the air was palpable. Carol's absence wasn't just a void for her family, but for the entire community. Something wasn't adding up. The city, full of noise and movement, suddenly felt like a quiet, suffocating place. What was really going on? And as the search slowed, and the hours turned into days, the fear grew. Had Carol simply vanished? Would anyone ever find out what happened to her? Or would this become just another case left to fade into the forgotten pile of unsolved mysteries? Where was Carol Williams? And why had she disappeared so mysteriously? This wasn't just another missing person case. It was the beginning of a haunting mystery, one that would test the very limits of what a community could endure. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank all of my amazing subscribers who've been supporting this channel. It's because of you that we keep growing and bringing these stories to light. If you found Carol's story so far gripping and want to learn more, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with all the twists and turns of this case, and share this story with someone who's into solved cold cases like this. And hey, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I drop another powerful video. I'm so grateful for your support. Let's keep the momentum going. 20 years, 2 decades since Carol Williams vanished without a trace. A time span so long that even the memories of her smile, her dependable presence, started to fade for many, but not for Jennifer. Jennifer Williams, Carol's sister, refused to let time wash away the hope she had been holding on to since that fateful morning in 1993. For years, Jennifer had made the journey from Vermont to New York, always going back to the hospital where Carol had worked, trying to hold on to some semblance of normality. The sterile white walls of Mount Sinai Hospital had never felt the same since Carol had disappeared. Jennifer would walk the hallways, hoping to hear the familiar sound of Carol's soft footsteps, to see her sister's face behind the reception desk, or walking the floors in her scrubs, smiling and greeting patients as she had always done before that day. But there was nothing. Carol's absence was felt by everyone in the hospital. The gap left by the dependable nurse was never truly filled. And Jennifer, though physically removed from the city, was still tied to it by the threads of love, grief, and an unyielding hope. She would stand in the lobby, stare at the elevators, and wonder what her sister would be doing if she were still here. Would she have helped a new patient? Would she have stopped to share a joke with one of the doctors in the break room? But every time Jennifer was reminded that Carol wasn't coming back, she was just gone. And as the years went on, her hope began to feel more like a haunting. The case, Carol's disappearance, was officially closed in 1997. That was the year the case went cold. Official records showed that the investigation had stalled. There were no more leads, no more interviews with witnesses. The case was filed away, forgotten, just like so many others. It felt as if the world had moved on. But Jennifer hadn't moved on. She still held on into the hope that one day someone would find the answers. Someone would uncover the truth. Someone would find Carol. She would visit the precinct and ask about the case every year. She would speak to the officers still assigned to cold cases. But it was always the same answer. No new leads, Jennifer. I'm sorry. The days turned into months, the months into years. And with each passing year, the case was becoming more and more like a ghost. People forgot. The police moved on. The world grew tired of waiting for the resolution. Was Carol just another lost person in New York? Another victim swallowed up by the city's cold, uncaring vastness? Would her case forever be locked away in a drawer, covered by dust, no more than a forgotten memory? Jennifer wasn't ready to accept that. She couldn't. She refused to. Then in 2018, something remarkable happened. A breakthrough. A tiny flicker of hope in the darkness that had consumed the case for so long. It wasn't a new witness or a revelation from a long-lost friend. No, this was something entirely different. The world had changed, technology had evolved, and with that evolution, the world of criminal investigations was forever transformed. Forensic genealogy, the ability to track DNA to distant relatives, had become a cutting-edge method in criminal investigations. What had once been the stuff of science fiction was now a tool that could breathe life into cold cases. It had been used to solve high-profile cases, like the Golden State Killer case, and now it was being applied to Carol Williams's case. Detective Maria Santos, part of the cold case unit in the New York Police Department, was the one who took the case on in 2018. She had just joined the unit and had heard about Carol's case. After reading through the file, she decided to revisit the case. She felt something was missing, something that had been overlooked perhaps, and then there it was. A clue so small, yet so crucial, that it had been buried in the archives of evidence. For years, the police had overlooked it, dismissed it as unimportant, but now it was glowing with significance. It had been found in the early stages of the investigation but never properly tested. And so, it had sat in a box, forgotten, its importance unrecognized. But now with the power of modern forensic technology, the DNA from the airbag could finally be analyzed. The possibility of linking the DNA to a suspect was no longer a distant dream. It was reality. As Santos dug through the files, the excitement in her chest grew. This small piece of evidence was about to unlock everything. Everything about Carol's disappearance, the person who had taken her, the truth behind the long unsolved mystery. The breakthrough was near. Could this small clue, the blood-stained airbag, finally be the key to unlocking the mystery of Carol Williams's disappearance? Or had they missed something even more significant? With every twist and turn, the investigation grew darker, and the truth seemed to slip just a little further away, like a shadow stretching just out of reach. But Detective Santos wasn't giving up. She had felt it, the same drive that Jennifer had carried for all those years, the same unrelenting hope that Carol's story was far from over. This was more than just a case. It was about justice for Carol. The airbag was just the beginning. What other secrets were waiting to be uncovered? What new revelations were about to shake the foundation of everything they thought they knew? One thing was clear. The past was about to collide with the present, and the truth, no matter how painful, was about to be revealed. The hunt for the truth was back on, and it was about to get even more intense. Harold Brennan was a quiet man. Too quiet, some might say. A building superintendent with an unremarkable job. Someone who blended into the background of the community. He wasn't a bad man, at least not in the eyes of most people who knew him. Just another face in the crowd. But beneath that quiet exterior, a darkness was brewing. No one had ever suspected Harold Brennan of anything sinister. He had been a familiar figure around the apartment complex where Carol Williams lived, always fixing something, always offering a hand when needed. He seemed trustworthy, reliable, like someone you could count on in an emergency. But what his neighbors didn't know was that Brennan had been quietly watching Carol for months. Every morning he would watch her leave her apartment, his eyes tracking her every move. Every evening he would know when she returned, waiting, lurking just out of sight. He didn't do anything overt, nothing that could raise suspicion, but he was always there in the background, always watching. What could have possibly driven a man like Brennan to obsess over a woman he barely knew? What twisted need pushed him to follow Carol, to monitor her daily routine as if he was part of her life, even when she didn't know he existed in that way? In a city like New York, where people rarely notice the people around them, Harold Brennan knew something most didn't. He knew how to hide in plain sight, and that's exactly what he did. Carol Williams never noticed. How could she have? She trusted him, just as everyone else did. After all, he was the building superintendent. He was the one who made sure everything in the building worked. Pipes didn't burst, the elevators ran smoothly, and the garbage was collected. He had the keys, he had the access. And now, after so many years, Detective Maria Santos was beginning to piece together the reality of Harold Brennan's obsession with Carol. What had started as an investigation into a missing persons case was slowly becoming a story about a stalker hiding in plain sight. A predator who had been inching closer to his victim for months without anyone realizing it. It wasn't just that Brennan had been following Carol, it was worse than that. Investigators unearthed an unsettling pattern, one that had been buried under layers of normalcy for years. Brennan hadn't just been following her, he had been studying her. He knew her routines down to the minute. Where she shopped, what time she left for work, which train she took, where she liked to grab coffee in the mornings. He knew when she would be home and when she wouldn't. He knew exactly when to be in the hallway outside her apartment, casually checking on a maintenance issue, making small talk. He was always there, always hovering just beneath her notice. But it wasn't just the simple act of following her. It was the way he manipulated his position as the superintendent to get closer. He used his access to the building to gain information. He knew when Carol would be alone, when she would be most vulnerable. There was one chilling detail that stood out among all the others. Brennan had been in the building every day when Carol left for work. He knew the precise moment she stepped out, and he made sure he was always there, watching her leave, watching her walk down the street. Had Carol noticed him watching? Had she felt uneasy? Did she sense something wasn't right? Or had she, too, been blind to the danger lurking so close to home? The more Detective Santos and her team uncovered, the clearer it became. Harold Brennan wasn't just a neighbor. He wasn't just a harmless super. He was a man obsessed. A man who had been stalking Carol for months, waiting for the perfect moment to act. But the scariest part? The part that made everything worse? Brennan was hiding in plain sight. How could Carol have missed the signs? How could she have trusted a man who had been watching her so closely, with such precision? How had Harold Brennan, someone who blended in so seamlessly with the rest of the building's tenants, managed to slip under Carol's radar? Was it possible that she had sensed something, but dismissed it as paranoia? Or was she so focused on her busy life that she simply couldn't see the threat right under her nose? And the bigger question remains, how many other women had he been watching? How many other lives had he been tracking before Carol became his ultimate target? As the investigation continued, the truth began to unfold with terrifying clarity. What started as a missing persons case was now a deeper, darker mystery, a story of obsession, manipulation, and hidden danger. And the further Detective Santos dug, the closer she came to realizing just how twisted Brennan's plans had become. It wasn't just Brennan's obsession with Carol that had surfaced during the investigation. As Santos and her team dug deeper into his past, they discovered a history of troubling behavior. He had a string of complaints against him from female tenants in the buildings he managed. Women had reported feeling uncomfortable around him, citing his tendency to linger in hallways, his overly curious questions about their schedules, and his unexplained visits to apartments. At first, these complaints seemed harmless enough. After all, what maintenance worker didn't ask questions about his tenants? What building superintendent didn't need to know when a resident would be home to fix a leak or inspect the pipes? But now, with the investigation into Carol's disappearance heating up, these complaints took on a much darker meaning. Each complaint was a piece of the puzzle, and when Santos started connecting the dots, the image became horrifyingly clear. Brennan wasn't just doing his job, he was stalking. He had been using his position to gain intimate knowledge about the lives of the women in the building, knowledge he was using for far more sinister purposes. He was collecting details, making mental notes about his victims, plotting and waiting. It was a pattern that had repeated itself over the years. In fact, Brennan's work history was filled with instances of tenant complaints that never seemed to go anywhere. Complaints about inappropriate behavior, about feeling unsafe, about a man who never seemed to know when to stop crossing boundaries. And yet, nothing ever came of it. No one had ever seen the danger in Harold Brennan. No one had connected the dots, until now. Santos's team began to dig deeper into Brennan's life, into his work history and his private affairs. It didn't take long to find more disturbing details. Brennan wasn't just a man who had been following Carol. He had been planning something much darker. There were files, documents, and notes that he had kept in secret, evidence of a life hidden behind the guise of normalcy. And the more Santos uncovered, the more chilling it became. Brennan had been planning Carol's abduction. He had been meticulously keeping track of her every move, learning her habits, studying her schedule, and waiting for the right moment to strike. What kind of person plans something so cold, so calculated? And how had he kept it hidden for so long? How had no one suspected a man who seemed so harmless, so unassuming? The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the answers became. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Harold Brennan had been living a double life, a man hiding his true self behind the facade of a building superintendent. But what was the true depth of his obsession? How far did Brennan's twisted fixation go? What other secrets was he hiding, and how long had he been planning his next move? Santos had only just begun to scratch the surface of Brennan's dark past, and what she was uncovering was more horrifying than anyone had expected. The case was no longer just about a missing woman. It was about a man who had been hiding in plain sight, who had been watching, planning, and waiting. And the deeper they went, the more chilling it became. Could they stop Brennan before he acted again? Or was Carol's disappearance only the beginning of something much darker? How could Carol have missed the signs? Do you think Brennan was hiding in plain sight the whole time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always read and respond. Also, where are you watching from? It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. As the investigation into Harold Brennan deepened, the case began to take a darker turn. What started as a missing persons investigation had now transformed into something far more sinister, a hunt for a predator hiding in plain sight. With every new piece of evidence that came to light, the chilling reality of Brennan's double life became clearer. It wasn't just Carol Williams who had disappeared without a trace. The deeper investigators dug into Brennan's life, the more they uncovered, and with each new discovery, a terrifying pattern began to form. Hidden in the shadows of Brennan's unassuming life was a dark secret that had remained locked away for years. Investigators began searching Brennan's apartment, a place that had always seemed ordinary to those who knew him. But what they found inside would change everything. Beneath layers of neatly folded laundry and routine furniture, Brennan had been hiding something far more disturbing, a collection. It wasn't just one item or a few trinkets that had been forgotten. No, what Brennan had amassed was something far more unsettling. In his apartment, hidden in plain sight, investigators found a trove of personal items from several women, including Carol, photos, jewelry, clothes. Each piece was carefully cataloged, as if Brennan had been keeping track of his victims, compiling mementos to remind him of his obsessions. He had been following them, tracking them, watching their every move. The significance of these discoveries was impossible to ignore. Brennan had been keeping trophies from his victims, personal mementos that only someone with a twisted, calculating mind would collect. For each woman he stalked, each woman he followed, there was evidence left behind, evidence that Brennan had carefully curated. Brennan wasn't just obsessed with Carol, he had been obsessed with other women too. And it wasn't just about the thrill of the chase. This was about control. This was about power. The realization hit the investigators hard. Carol Williams was just the beginning. Was Carol just the first of many victims? How many women had Brennan stalked over the years? How many lives had he destroyed before he finally crossed the line with Carol? The fear was palpable. What had started as a missing person case was now a revelation of something much darker. A man who had been hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting, and collecting his trophies without anyone noticing. How many more women had crossed his path, and how many of them had vanished into the shadows just like Carol? The more the investigators learned, the more the full scope of Brennan's obsession became clear. It wasn't just a passing fixation or a fleeting crush. No, Brennan had been methodical, calculated. His obsession with Carol was no accident. It was the result of months, perhaps even years, of careful planning. Brennan had been following Carol every day. He knew her routine better than she did. The way she left for work at precisely the same time each morning, the route she took to the subway, her exact schedule. Every detail was meticulously tracked, as if Brennan had created a mental map of Carol's life. His obsession wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow, creeping horror that had built over time, layer by layer, until it had consumed him entirely. And the most disturbing part? Carol had no idea. She had no idea that every morning as she walked to the subway, she was being watched. She had no idea that someone was following her, tracking her every movement. And even when she began to feel uneasy, when she started to notice strange coincidences in an unfamiliar presence in the shadows, she never connected the dots. She had no reason to suspect that the man who seemed so trustworthy, a man who lived in her building, who was always there to fix a broken pipe or help with maintenance, was actually stalking her, planning something far more sinister. It was clear now. Brennan hadn't just been following Carol out of curiosity. This wasn't some passing fancy. He had been planning her abduction for months, carefully orchestrating every detail, learning her movements, tracking her routines, and getting closer with each passing day. The intensity of his obsession was unfathomable. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Brennan hadn't just been a quiet observer. He had been an active participant in Carol's life, weaving himself into the fabric of her daily existence without her ever realizing it. He had made himself an essential part of her routine, but all the while he was calculating and planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Brennan had been following her, tracking her, taking note of her every move. He knew when she was most vulnerable, when she was most likely to be alone. He had been watching Carol for months, quietly building his obsession, until it eventually reached a breaking point. What was even more chilling was the realization that Brennan's obsession didn't stop with Carol. The personal items recovered from his apartment weren't just from her. They were from several other women, women who had crossed his path and been watched, stalked, and manipulated without ever realizing the danger lurking in their midst. These women, too, had been unknowingly drawn into Brennan's web, a web he had spun with terrifying patience. He had been tracking their every movement, collecting their personal belongings, keeping photographs, and taking notes about their lives. He had been hiding his true intentions behind the mask of a harmless, reliable neighbor, all the while collecting trophies from his victims. How could Brennan have hidden his obsession for so long? How did Carol and the other women miss the signs? How did Brennan, someone who blended into his surroundings so seamlessly, manage to live a double life without anyone noticing? As the investigation continued to unravel the depth of Brennan's dark obsession, the question remained, how many more victims had he stalked? And how many women had he driven to the brink before Carol? The pieces were falling into place, but the investigation was far from over. Brennan's web of lies, manipulations, and obsessions was just beginning to unravel. And the truth, though it was beginning to emerge, was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The investigation had taken a turn. What started as a case of one missing woman had evolved into a deep dive into a man's obsession that spanned decades. With every new discovery, the horror grew. But as each piece of the puzzle fell into place, one thing became clear. Harold Brennan had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. What was his next move? And was the investigation closing in on him? Or was there more to this twisted tale than anyone could have imagined? The deeper they went, the darker the story became. But would Brennan's secrets finally be exposed? Or was there something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface? It was a moment the community had waited for, though no one could have anticipated the seismic shock that would reverberate through the quiet streets of Queens, New York. After 25 long years, the man who had hidden in plain sight, whose twisted obsessions had torn apart lives and haunted families, was finally arrested. Harold Brennan, the seemingly harmless building superintendent, was no longer the friendly neighbor that everyone thought they knew. News of his arrest spread like wildfire, and with it, a deep sense of disbelief settled over the town. People who had trusted him for years, who had relied on him to maintain their apartments and take care of their buildings, now found themselves questioning everything they had ever known about the man. How could someone like Brennan, someone who had been a fixture in their daily lives, be capable of such a monstrous crime? Detective Maria Santos had coordinated the operation with military precision, knowing that Brennan's calm exterior would likely mask the chaos bubbling inside. It was 6 a.m. when the arrest was made, early enough to catch him off guard, but not so early as to be intrusive. Brennan was taken into custody quietly, without fanfare. His life forever changed in that single, haunting moment. For Brennan, the arrest was just another part of the routine. He was calm, collected, almost disturbingly so. His face gave nothing away as the handcuffs were snapped around his wrists. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. There was no anger, no denial, no fear, just the quiet indifference of someone who had spent a lifetime hiding in plain sight. When questioned, Brennan maintained his innocence. His calm demeanor, his unwavering certainty, sent a chill down the spines of the detectives and officers present. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA found on Carol's belongings, surveillance footage, witness statements, even journals that detailed his stalking. But Brennan refused to budge. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said when confronted with the charges. "I don't know Carol Williams. I didn't harm anyone." The words sounded empty, and yet they were delivered with such conviction that for a moment, even the investigators seemed to doubt themselves. But the evidence was irrefutable. Brennan's arrest, though satisfying for those who had waited decades for answers, also raised new questions. The community, stunned by the revelation, struggled to comprehend how they could have been so deceived for so long. How could they have let someone like Brennan slip through the cracks? How could the signs have been so clear and yet so hidden from view? The community's trust was shattered, but would justice be served? Would Brennan finally face the consequences of his actions, or was there more to this case than anyone realized? The trial begins. The arrest was only the beginning of a long and emotional journey toward justice. Brennan's trial would be the moment the community had been waiting for. The chance to see the truth exposed, to see the man who had haunted their town for decades finally face accountability for the lives he had destroyed. The courtroom was packed with witnesses, family members, and press, all eager to see how the case would unfold. Jennifer Williams, Carol's sister, sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Every day of the trial was a painful reminder of the years spent waiting for answers. The prosecution wasted no time, presenting a damning case against Brennan. The DNA evidence was clear. Brennan's genetic material was found on Carol's belongings, on her purse, her Metro card, and even on the airbag of her car. The prosecution's forensic expert walked the jury through the process of analyzing the evidence, making it clear that Brennan's connection to Carol's disappearance was undeniable. But it wasn't just the physical evidence that sealed Brennan's fate. The prosecution also presented witness testimony, detailing Brennan's history of inappropriate behavior, his obsessive tendencies, and his secret collection of photos and personal items from his victims. It became clear that Carol was not his first, and, as the investigation revealed, she wouldn't be his last. Jennifer listened intently as the witnesses spoke, hearing details she had never known about her sister's life. The discovery of Brennan's obsession, the hidden items in his apartment, the journals that chronicled his every move. It was overwhelming, but there was no denying it anymore. Brennan had been stalking Carol, and he had been planning her abduction for months. But Brennan's defense team was not going to make it easy. They tried to poke holes in the evidence, casting doubt on the reliability of the DNA analysis and questioning the validity of the surveillance footage. Wasn't it possible that this was all just circumstantial? The defense attorney asked. After all, there's no direct proof linking Mr. Brennan to the actual crime. You have no body, no clear motive, just a collection of bits and pieces. The courtroom was on edge. The defense's tactics were calculated, attempting to create doubt in the minds of the jurors. They were doing everything they could to discredit the overwhelming evidence, to plant the idea that Brennan's involvement wasn't as clear as the prosecution made it seem. But despite their best efforts, the prosecution remained steadfast. The evidence was strong. Brennan's past behavior, his obsession with Carol, and the disturbing collection of trophies he had kept were all proof of his guilt. Still, the defense persisted, looking for cracks in the case that could give Brennan a fighting chance. Would the overwhelming evidence be enough to bring Brennan to justice? Or would the defense succeed in casting doubt, leaving the jury to question everything they had just heard? As the trial continued, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable. The defense's arguments, though weak, were enough to make people wonder, could they escape the truth? Could Brennan, this seemingly harmless man, slip through the cracks again? The case was far from over. And the real question was, would Brennan finally face the consequences of his actions, or would his web of lies continue to deceive everyone around him? As the trial pressed on, every piece of evidence was crucial. Every word spoken in the courtroom carried weight. Jennifer sat silently, her heart heavy with the years of waiting. But each passing day brought her closer to the truth she had longed for, the truth that had eluded them all for so long. And yet, as the trial moved forward, one thing became clear: Brennan's time was running out. But would the jury deliver the verdict that would finally bring justice for Carol? The trial is far from over, and the stakes are higher than ever. Will Brennan's carefully constructed facade come crumbling down? Or will he slip away once more, leaving the community and Carol's family to wonder if justice was ever really within their grasp? How did you feel when Brennan was finally arrested after 25 years? Was there relief, or did it bring more unsettling questions? Comment below with your thoughts. I respond to every comment. Also, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. The trial was no longer just a legal matter. It had become an emotional battleground, not only for Carol's family, but for the entire community. As the days passed, more and more people came forward, each with their own story about Harold Brennan, each person adding a layer to the disturbing picture of a man who had been hiding in plain sight for so long. Former tenants of the buildings where Brennan had worked, women who had lived in the apartments he managed, now shared their experiences with the court. They spoke of strange encounters, of uncomfortable conversations in hallways, of him lingering just a little too long when his job required him to fix a leaky faucet or change a light bulb. Some women had dismissed his advances, chalking them up to harmless flirtations, while others felt an unease they couldn't explain at the time. But as the trial unfolded, the stories began to paint a chilling portrait of a man who had been stalking and manipulating the women in his care for years. A woman named Paula, who had lived in an apartment Brennan had overseen, recalled how he would ask personal questions under the guise of routine maintenance. Questions about her job, her hours, her relationship status. He knew everything about me, she said, her voice trembling. I never thought it was anything strange, but looking back, I realized he was collecting information. He was watching me. Paula's testimony was just the beginning. More women came forward, each with their own experience of Brennan's behavior. A former tenant named Sophie shared how Brennan had gone so far as to sneak into her apartment while she was at work. He had a key. Of course, Sophie said, but it was more than that. He knew exactly when I'd be gone. I could feel his eyes on me. I started locking my door every single time after that. Each story added a new layer to the horror that was Brennan's double life, one that had gone unnoticed for so long. He had been hiding in plain sight, right under their noses, carefully maintaining the facade of a reliable, harmless building superintendent, while secretly violating the trust of the women who depended on him. And as these women spoke, the courtroom, once filled with skepticism and doubt, shifted. It became clear that Brennan's behavior had been escalating for years, that his obsession with control and surveillance was not limited to Carol. There were others, and Brennan had taken great care to hide it, to present himself as a man who could be trusted until the moment the mask slipped, revealing the monster beneath. The emotional impact on the community was immediate and palpable. People who had once trusted Brennan, who had called him a friend and neighbor, were now left grappling with the reality that they had been deceived by someone they thought they knew. The betrayal was deep, and it cut through the fabric of their small, tight-knit neighborhood. Jennifer Williams, who had been so focused on seeking justice for her sister, was now forced to confront a larger, more disturbing truth. Brennan hadn't just stolen her sister's life. He had taken something from the entire community: trust, safety, a sense of security that, once shattered, could never fully be repaired. But there was more to this reckoning. As the trial pressed on, it ignited a broader national conversation, one that extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The case was not just a local story anymore. It had captured the attention of the public, sparking debates and discussions that reached the far corners of the country. The media covered every twist and turn, drawing in viewers who had been captivated by the shocking revelations about Brennan and his hidden life. The more the public learned, the more they began to realize that this was not just the story of one woman's tragic disappearance. It was the story of how too many people had failed to see the warning signs. The trial exposed how Brennan had used his position of power as a building superintendent to stalk and control the women around him. The women who had been his victims were not just faceless names. They were neighbors, co-workers, friends. They had trusted Brennan, not knowing the true nature of the man behind the uniform. The discussion quickly turned to how these kinds of crimes had gone unnoticed for so long. It sparked questions about the systems that allowed someone like Brennan to operate with impunity for years. Why didn't anyone notice? People asked. How could a man who was in charge of maintenance for these buildings get away with this? The issue of background checks became a central talking point. How many people like Brennan were out there, hiding in positions of trust and authority, with unchecked access to their communities? How many more women had been victimized by men who used their jobs to exploit their power? And it wasn't just about Brennan. This case highlighted a larger issue: the failure of institutions to protect women from people like him. The legal and real estate systems had failed to address the warning signs, and now, as the trial unfolded, people were beginning to ask themselves tough questions about how society could allow such behavior to go unchecked for so long. The issue of stalking, of course, became one of the main topics of conversation. How could Brennan have been allowed to stalk so many women over the years? How many red flags had been ignored? The trial revealed how stalking behaviors, no matter how subtle, could be the precursor to far more dangerous crimes. The public's outrage was clear. This wasn't just a personal tragedy for Carol's family. It was a societal failure, one that left many women vulnerable to predators hiding in plain sight, and it became clear that this was a fight for more than just justice for Carol. It was a fight for all the women who had been stalked, silenced, and forgotten. Could the community ever forgive Brennan for what he did? How many more secrets did he hide? How many other women had been affected by his twisted behavior? As the trial entered its final stages, these questions lingered in the air. And though Brennan was already facing the possibility of a life sentence, the truth of his actions and the devastating ripple effects they had caused would take far longer to heal. What else would come to light before the trial was over? What more was Brennan hiding, and how far had his web of deception spread? The reckoning had begun, but the most unsettling truths were still to come. The community was now forced to confront not just the man they had trusted, but the system that had allowed him to operate for so long. The full extent of Brennan's crimes was still unfolding, and with each new revelation, the weight of what had been lost grew heavier. Would the community ever truly heal from the betrayal? Would the truth finally bring the closure that Carol's family had been waiting for? Or would it only lead to more questions, more pain? The trial was far from over, and the biggest twist was yet to come. The moment had come, the moment that had been 25 years in the making. The jury had deliberated, and now it was time for the decision. The courtroom, once filled with tension, now held its breath as the judge stood to deliver the verdict. Brennan sat there unmoved, almost eerily calm, his usual demeanor of detachment giving nothing away. But behind the stillness, something else was at work. The weight of the years of all the lives he had destroyed hung over him. But the community was trembling, waiting, holding its breath. "Harold Brennan," the judge's voice rang out, "we find you guilty of the murder of Carol Williams." The words landed like a hammer, each syllable striking harder than the last. The courtroom remained silent for a moment before a collective breath was drawn. Jennifer Williams, who had waited decades for this moment, sat frozen for a second, stunned as if the truth was too heavy to bear. Carol's family, her sister Jennifer, her mother, and those who had carried the pain of her disappearance, felt a mix of emotions, relief. Yes, there was relief, but there was something more profound in that moment, something that would stay with them forever. It was a burden, a weight. The truth had come, but it had come at a cost they would never fully understand. Justice had been served, but the price had been steep. Jennifer Williams clutched the armrest in front of her, her fingers white-knuckled. She looked at the ground, her eyes brimming with tears, not of happiness, but of sorrow. The joy of closure wasn't as sweet as she had imagined. She had spent a lifetime in the dark, waiting for this moment, and now that it had come, she found herself engulfed by the heavy weight of what they had all lost. Outside the courtroom, the verdict reverberated through the streets of Queens. For years, Harold Brennan had been a trusted member of the community, a building superintendent, a seemingly harmless man who had spent decades in positions of power and trust, his dark secret hidden beneath the surface. The shock was felt not just by those who had known him, but by an entire city that had unwittingly lived with a monster in their midst. But as the reality of the verdict settled in, the conversation shifted. This case, while significant for Carol's family, was just the beginning of a much larger issue, one that would affect communities everywhere. People began to ask themselves the tough questions. How many more people like Brennan were out there? How many other monsters hid behind respectable facades, trusted by their neighbors, living in plain sight? The trial had sparked a national conversation about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of background checks, and how institutions had failed to protect women. Carol's case wasn't just a tragedy, it was a reminder of the dangers that could be lurking in the most familiar places. A trusted neighbor, a reliable coworker, a man with a key to your home. Forensic technology had played a pivotal role in the case, an unexpected breakthrough from a cold case file that had sat gathering dust for decades. Without advancements in DNA analysis and enhanced surveillance footage, this case might have remained unsolved, like so many others. Carol's family had fought to keep her memory alive, and now with modern science, they had been given the truth they so desperately needed. The verdict brought with it a renewed focus on forensic science, background checks, and how institutions failed to act when warning signs were present. Public discourse around stalking, domestic violence, and community safety gained traction. It wasn't just about Brennan anymore. It was about systemic failures that allowed these kinds of predators to go unnoticed for years. The ripple effect of this case would impact many future cases, forcing changes in how missing person reports were handled, how communities responded, and how justice could be achieved through the persistence of modern science. Justice was served and the news outlets reported, but how many more hidden monsters are out there? The chilling thought lingered in the air long after the verdict was delivered. How many more cases like Carol's had been swept under the rug? How many predators had hidden their dark secrets for decades, unnoticed by the very systems meant to protect us? As Brennan's trial concluded, the question on everyone's mind became not just about the past, but about the future. And though Brennan had been convicted, the haunting thought remained: just how many more men like him were walking among us, hiding in plain sight? For Carol's family, the end of the trial was not the end of the pain. The relief of justice was mixed with the sorrow of so many years spent wondering, not knowing. Jennifer Williams sat in her quiet apartment, reflecting on the long road that had brought her to this moment. In those years of waiting, she had learned the hard lesson that justice didn't always come in the form you expected. Sometimes it came with a price. Sometimes it came after years of uncertainty, of heartache, of pain that never quite went away. But in this moment, there was some small comfort in knowing that her sister's memory had been honored, that Carol had not been forgotten, that the truth, as brutal as it was, had finally come to light. Jennifer had spent countless hours combing through old reports, asking questions that no one had been willing to ask before. She had fought for this, against the odds. The family had spent decades chasing leads, calling police departments, and following dead ends, but they had never given up. The case wasn't just about finding Carol, it was about finding the truth. And in the end, that truth had come. Carol's face would never be forgotten. She would be remembered for the nurse she was, the woman who cared for everyone, who made sure the people around her were safe and loved. She would be remembered for the sister she was, for the friend she was. Carol had left a mark on her community, even after all these years. And in the end, she had helped shine a light on the very darkness that had stolen her from them. But the reckoning wasn't just for Carol's family. It was for everyone who had been impacted by Brennan's deception, by his stalking, by his hidden life. It was for the community that had trusted him, for the women who had been watched, followed, and manipulated. Carol's case had opened the door to a much larger conversation, one that would continue long after the verdict was delivered. And though it brought a sense of closure to her family, the ripple effects were only beginning. What other cold cases are out there waiting to be solved? It's a question that haunts every investigator, every family member who has waited for the truth. The breakthrough in Carol Williams's case didn't just close one chapter, it opened a floodgate. There are other families, other victims, still waiting, still hoping, still searching. And while Carol's case may have found its resolution, the fight is far from over. The darkness is still out there, hiding in plain sight. Thank you again for sticking with this powerful story of Carol Williams. Your support has meant the world to me, and it's been incredible to see our community grow with such dedicated viewers. If you've been captivated by this case, don't just stop here. Hit like on this video if you think justice was finally served, and make sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on the next thrilling story. And I'd love for you to share this video with someone who loves solving mysteries like this one. Let's spread the word about these stories that deserve to be heard. Also, make sure to turn on the notification bell so you can be the first to catch every new video I upload. If you want more solved cold cases like this, check out our previous videos on this channel. You won't regret it.